Interpreting the American aspiration toward Greenland as the opening of a conversation yields something very different from what we see today. The opportunity for Copenhagen is to think creatively about its own interests and relationships and engage in the fundamentals of statecraft to generate a mutual win among all parties. This could look like many things. A condominium that shares sovereignty over the island, for example, or American sovereign base areas, leaving both the United States and Denmark alike as sovereigns within the island. The expedient of the condominium allows both nations to exercise full and joint sovereignty over Greenland. Though it has fallen into general disuse in the post-Second World War era, the idea of the condominium was once a common feature of post-Westphalian statecraft. Joint sovereignty over territory was exercised throughout Europe, in the patchwork of the German states, including the region that now constitutes the Danish-German border, in what is now Belgium and the Netherlands, in post-partition Krakow, in Norway's own Arctic, and to this very day in a small island between France and Spain that is the acknowledged territory of both powers. There are ample non-European examples as well. Samoa was for some time under the joint sovereignty of Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Modern Sudan, too, was a formal condominium of Egypt and the United Kingdom until 1956, and Sudan and South Sudan currently maintain a condominium in Abyei. The condominium, then, is a time-tested and simple expedient for the resolution of competing claims to sovereignty, well-grounded in history and statesmanship, and formulated for the adjudication of scenarios like the Danish-American Greenland standoff. Another workable concept for generating a win-win for both nations and their aspirations to Greenlandic sovereignty might be the model of the sovereign base area. The archetypes for this are the British cantonments of Akrotiri and Deucalion, carved out of the Cypriot littoral, within which the United Kingdom exercises full sovereignty while leaving independent Cyprus and its population otherwise undisturbed. This solution recalls the old Panama Canal Zone, an area of American sovereignty within the Panamanian Republic, but without the political conflicts generated nearby. This, too, is a solution allowing for both nations to meet their sovereignty red lines if they wish for it. And that is from an article entitled Greenland Shows the Limits and Opportunities of Danish Statecraft by me, from January 21st, 2026, at the Engelsberg Idea site. I'm Joshua Treviño, and this is The Hard Country, and it's also a very special episode of the America First Policy Institute's Western Front podcast. Welcome.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Hard Country, and also a special welcome to all the viewers who are joining us from the Western Front. We are here in Austin, Texas today. My name is Ariana Guajardo. If I haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet, I work at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and I help make videos that make Texas and America the freest places on earth. And today I'm joined, as always, with Joshua Treviño, but also a special guest from the America First Policy Institute, Melissa Ford Maldonado. She is the director of the Western Hemisphere Initiative there at AFPI, and also a co-host of the Western Front. So welcome, and welcome back to the studio here in Austin.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
And she was formerly the co-host of this show, The Hard Country.
She was. So for longtime listeners, you probably remember her and, of course, miss her insights. So if you're wanting to hear more of those, you can always check out the Western Front. If you just, Mexico is not enough, you need to see the entire Western Hemisphere. So how is DC, Melissa? Is it a little bit colder over there?
It is very freezing. I will say it's been an amazing break to get to come back to Austin and see you all.
Well, you did move to DC at an exciting time because we had a shift in the focus on the global stage. I feel like in the past growing up, there was always this focus on the Middle East, and all of a sudden now we're talking about stuff happening basically in our backyard. So I would love to hear from both of you guys on, first of all, were you expecting this shift to take place, and why did it happen in the first place? Melissa, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll start. I think we weren't necessarily expecting it, but we were hoping for it. I remember that when Josh and I were filming The Hard Country, probably about 2 years ago, we filmed an episode titled Happy Birthday, Monroe Doctrine. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
And people at the time kept coming to me. I don't know if you can say the same thing, but they didn't know what the Monroe Doctrine was. No one had talked about it in such a long time And they didn't understand what it meant. They thought it meant this very like imperialist posture at the time. And now it's become a very common thing to talk about in DC circles. I don't know if you talk about it that much here, but the president has echoed, the Monroe Doctrine. The recent national security strategy that was released, I think, on December 3rd, talks a lot about the Monroe Doctrine. It actually cites it 4 different times. And so I think that the U.S. posture has really changed in terms of foreign policy and national security. I think for the very first time this Thanksgiving and this Christmas, Josh and I were talking about this, but the conversations were not, at least the foreign policy conversations that we all had, were not focused on what's going on halfway across the world in the Middle East or in Ukraine. But for the very first time, everyone was talking about what's happening in Venezuela, what's happening in Mexico, what's happening with all these elections going on in the Western Hemisphere. And so we've seen a real drastic, a real radical, and what we think is a very long overdue shift towards focusing more on the Western Hemisphere, towards wanting to lead more in the Western Hemisphere. Why? Because it's our very first line of defense, right? Because everything that happens in the Western Hemisphere ends up affecting us and kind of ends up one way or another on the hard country, right? So everything that we see, everything from, a bad collapsing economy to insecurity, to crime, to dictators, to different issues that we've had in Latin America, drug trafficking, you name it, ends up causing a surge at our border, ends up causing a lot more insecurity in our cities. And so it was definitely a long overdue shift.
So on the hard country, we really do touch on some of what you were saying, which is the Texas-Mexico relationship and the American-Mexico relationship. And the reason why we wanted to have you on the show today was to give the broader context around what's happening around that and the other countries that come into play. Josh, would you like to touch a little bit more on that and what we're hoping to provide to our viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me second everything that Melissa said, because it's all true. I mean, this has come to the forefront of the policy discussion in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere because the crisis in the hemisphere has grown so grave. When we think about the Western Hemisphere, you're really thinking about an area that has had essentially a generation's worth of strategic neglect from the United States. So fortunately, the second Trump administration is really correcting that, kind of filling in some of the hard power gaps, obviously, but a lot of the relational gaps as well that needed tending to. And so that's work that's going to continue on for several years. But with respect to the hard country, obviously it's a show that is dedicated to Mexico. I mean, we would talk because Mexico is the hard country. But everything that happens in Mexico takes place in a broader regional and hemispheric context. And so you and I have talked a little bit about this before. I know, Melissa, you and I talked about it when we were doing the show. Mexico is not a solitary actor. Its regime understands itself to be in this very long tradition of the Latin American populist left, which has emanations in Cuba, in Venezuela until very recently, throughout in Bolivia, for example, so throughout the hemisphere. And so all that constitutes the environment in which the Mexican regime operates. And so to really fully understand what's happening in Mexico and also in U.S.-Mexico relations and Texas-Mexico relations, you do have to know what's going on in the rest of the hemisphere and how Mexico understands its place within it. It's the most populous of the Latin American states. It is arguably, I mean, the Mexicans will tell you it's the most important one. Mm-hmm. It may be to me, but opinions could differ on that. But it's certainly the most important one to the United States. And so, as we seek to understand it, we have to understand everything around it.
Right. And now the conversation of the Western Hemisphere has not only includes Mexico and the rest of South America, but as you started the show with, all the way through Greenland, and we will get to that later, I promise you. But I want to start in South America, specifically with Colombia. I know we're talking a lot about Venezuela recently. That's still in the news. But Melissa, you've spoken to me before about how Colombia is a country that not a lot of people are focusing on, but maybe they should be. Why is that?
Yeah, Josh and I have talked about this before. I think we actually talked about it on the Western Front, if you want to go back and listen to our first episode. But people always seem to be surprised when we talk about Colombia's strategic importance to the U.S. And it's important for a lot of reasons. Part of it is its geography. It's in a very strategic place. Part of it is they've been a longtime partner of the U.S. on everything from drug trafficking to military partners.
I didn't know that before you had brought that up.
I think I'm starting to realize a lot of people don't know that. They're very surprised when they hear that. But Colombia actually worked really hard to be a partner to the U.S. on that front. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was in 2022, Josh, that they became a major non-NATO ally. Like they were classified as an ally to the United States, which they achieved through very hard work, basically standing up to their own facets of their organized crime, standing up to cartels. They worked really hard for that. And we have seen a major shift, I think, not even in the recent months. 2025 was a very rough year for U.S. Colombia relations.
Well, give me some insight into that for people who don't know what's happening.
Yeah, no,
Slash
happy
myself.
to. Yeah, it was definitely a very interesting year. So I think there were a lot of disputes between both presidents, between both President Trump that took office in January 20th of last year, so just a little bit over a year ago, and President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who's up for re-election this year. But they don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues. President Petro has been very critical of the U.S. position on the hemisphere. They've been very critical of our anti-drug policies. They think that the U.S. is kind of infringing on the sovereignty of a lot of Latin American countries. With what we saw with the action on Venezuela starting between August and September. It kind of started in August with the bounty, and then in September with the beginning of the drug strikes. President Petro was very critical of those being unconstitutional, it not being right, it violating international law. President Trump obviously didn't like that. And we've had kind of an interesting shift at the beginning of this year with what happened in Venezuela, because on January 7th, there was a phone call between President Trump and President Petro where I believe it lasted about an hour. It was interesting timing, too, because it happened just as President Petro was getting ready to address a big protest that he himself had called in Colombia against, it was like a pro-sovereignty protest. And President Trump called him. I think they talked for about an hour. And it seems to have been a good call because right after President Trump posted on Truth Social that it had been a great honor to talk to President Petro, which was a very different tone to hear after, the way that they have been communicating. And he invited him to the White House. And this was an interesting shift because just a couple of days earlier, President Trump called Petro a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, he did not mince words.
So that's a big flip in demeanor, I guess.
Yeah.
For that relationship.
Definitely. And we will have to see what happens during the meeting. It's happening next week, so it might have already happened by the time this episode airs. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think that with this year being an election year in Colombia, not only for presidential elections, but also for legislative elections, there's a lot of things that can happen. Petro cannot run again, but his party can. And I think that's part of the reason that President Trump thinks that he needs to meet with Petro, because there's a chance that his party might get reelected. A lot of people think that he could just wait Colombia out, see who gets elected, and then, fix that relationship because it seemed a little unsalvageable. But we'll have to see what happens in the meeting. The U.S. and Colombia is a very important relationship. We've talked about this, Josh. If we thought that losing Venezuela was bad, Colombia is on a whole other level, because they really have been a strategic partner to the U.S. and we want to see that happen again. We haven't seen it in the last couple of months. The U.S. has decertified, I believe it was in October, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. The U.S. decertified Colombia as a drug war partner because they realized that Colombia was no longer cooperating with the U.S., that they were having a record production of cocaine, all at the same time while President Petro was denying that. And so it's been a very interesting time for U.S. Colombia relations.
So how does that stack up whenever you compare it to the Mexico's relationship with the U.S. and drugs and cartels over time? It seems to me like it might follow a similar pattern, if not a few years behind it. What do you think, Josh?
It does. There's a more robust opposition in Colombia, for one thing. There's a real possibility that there might be a rightward shift in both the legislative elections coming in March in Colombia and also the presidential elections that are coming in May. So it's not as far down the path as Mexico is. And we have to remember that in Mexico, the Morenistas have really stamped out a lot of independent civil society. I mean, there's an opposition there, but it's effectively powerless. Now, a lot of that is a reflection upon that opposition. So let's be clear of that. But Colombia is still genuinely pluralistic. We'll see how long that lasts, though. The game for the left right now in Colombia it really is less with the presidency in May and more with the legislature in March, because if they're able to get supermajorities in the two chambers of the legislature, they can unilaterally change the Colombian constitution. And if they do that, all bets are off. And one of the things that we have talked with various individuals about at AFPI with the Western Hemisphere Initiative, and Melissa's led the way in this, is talked with individuals who have raised the alarm about the Petro regime's efforts to essentially inflate the vote in rural areas. And so these rural areas in Colombia, and there's a lot of rural areas in Colombia, because you've got kind of the northern hinge of the Andes, you've got the beginning of the Amazonian biome, I guess, and so these are frequently cartel and guerrilla controlled territories out there. And what the Petro regime, Duque actually started this, unfortunately, but what the past two presidencies have done is they've essentially conceded these territorial safe areas, I don't know what else you call them, to ELN, to FARC, to a variety of organizations. I think Clan del Golfo too, if I remember correctly, which is completely insane. But and we see this in this. We've talked on the show before about the Estado de Narco, how there's a synthesis and a trade between the state and the cartels. Well, you do see that in areas of Colombia. It's not throughout the entire state. It's not as bad as Mexico at the top, but in these discrete areas, you do see these bad actors, these cartel actors, looking like they may deliver extra votes, which is a euphemism, fraudulent votes, to the left. And if that happens, all bets are off. I want to emphasize something that Melissa noted. Colombia's been a military ally of the United States for generations. Colombians fought in the Korean War, 75 years ago. And so we have a long-standing relationship with them. For the United States, Colombia is the keystone of South America. I would argue that it's the most important country in South America to the United States. The urban population, institutionally, it has generally tried to do the right thing. A lot of entrepreneurialism, a lot of economic energy, a lot of just very rich potential in a place like Colombia that has perennially been dragged down by two things. One has been kind of this default to civic violence. They had this period called La Violencia that really marred a lot of Colombian civil society. And then in the modern era, you had the combination of this endemic guerrilla warfare in the rural areas, plus obviously the trafficking cartels. And the Colombian state did great work in defeating both of those until the past decade. So the question is that progress going to be lost? Is Colombia still going to be an ally? I think we're going to know by Memorial Day, probably.
And so that comes down to elections, but Colombia is not the only country that's having elections, some that happened recently and then upcoming. Melissa, would you shed some light on the changing or potential changes in the political atmosphere due to those elections?
Yeah, last year was a big year. We went into 2025 saying, okay, this is like the Super Bowl of Latin American elections. But 2026 is still also a big year. Both years have been big for elections. We have seen in the last couple of years, really, that there's starting to be a shift in the whole Western Hemisphere, right? Includes the U.S. But we have also seen a lot of countries in Latin America starting to wake up to a lot of the policies that had been not working for them, put plainly. And so we saw a shift starting with Argentina. That was a major one. We recently saw a shift in August, although there was a runoff with Bolivia, which after 20 years of socialist rule, you thought it was long gone, right? And it's not. And so we also had the elections in Chile in November, although there was also a runoff, but we saw Jose Antonio Cast, who won as president. So a lot of figures on the right that are kind of Trumpian figures in their own way, which has been really interesting because President Trump is often painted as kind of an alienating figure. And once he was elected, there was a lot of people that thought that might have an effect on other elections. And really what has happened is a lot of people have started jumping into the movement, and Latin America has been coming up with like their very own versions of Trump in one way or another, right? Kind of like we see with Milei, or what we see with Bukele in El Salvador. And so that continues. This year there will be elections in Peru, in Colombia. We have them in Brazil, which those are going to be big as well. So it's something we will continue keeping an eye on. But we are starting to see a lot of these countries in South America start to want to have a very close relationship with the U.S. And the U.S. responding to that,
And is that both political parties that are trying to have that relationship, or is it the right wing that's pushing that movement towards working with the U.S.?
It's mostly, what I've seen is I think it's mostly the right wing. I've not seen a lot of, well, I guess there are some. We see Claudia Sheinbaum and Trump are now BFFs.
Petro.
Yeah. And Petro.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Petro has been trying as well. But what we see is that some of the actions that Trump has been taking recently, for example, the capture of Nicolás Maduro earlier this month, that seems like forever ago, but yeah, earlier this month, that is having even more of an effect because it is just so overwhelmingly positive for the region and everybody knows it. I think here in the U.S., we still hear a lot of debate over whether that's a good thing or not. I can tell you in places like Bolivia, it's been overwhelmingly a positive thing. And so it's causing, I think, this effect where a lot of people want to be closer to the Trump administration, or a lot of people will vote differently even because of it. So definitely there's more of an appetite to rebuild that relationship with the United States, especially now that the United States is once again drawing closer to wanting to have a relationship with these South American countries.
Mm-hmm. There's something that I think is worth eliminating in this in terms of how Donald Trump is received overseas. In Europe and in Canada, it's a commonplace, and it's mostly true that he's received very poorly. So you see again and again this phenomenon of these electorates that might be going for the right, but then if there's an association with President Trump, that they move away from that. And so there's been a lot of follow-on effects and a lot of conversations in the European right as to the extent of whether or not they need to align with the Americans or not. Mm-hmm. It's a completely different landscape in Latin America. Kind of to Melissa's point. And that in Latin America, they seem to find Trump a very familiar sort of figure. And so there's a positive desire to move closer to him, which is mostly on the right, I agree, but also does show up in Claudia Sheinbaum and Gustavo Petro. And even Lula seems to have in Brazil.
And do you think it's the personality that they find to be culturally similar? Just the bluntness, maybe?
I don't remember if you and I ever talked about this on the like version 1.0 of the Hard Country, but it has been said. Well, it's been said by me, but it's been said by other people before that in South Texas, Donald Trump's style of leadership is actually quite familiar. Like there's something about it that plays into this ethic of the great man and the caudillismo. I mean, none of this isn't critique, by the way. It is a different kind of political language and ethic of leadership. And I think what's familiar in South Texas is also going to be familiar and transferable to most of Latin America, which is partially explanatory of the very different reactions that you get in these electorates, totally in contravention to what you see in Europe, that are willing to say, you know what, let's vote for this, let's go for it, whether it's in Honduras or Chile or Ecuador or anywhere else that's held elections lately, and they go right.
It's just, I guess, an interesting contrast, though, and to what we're looking at now with the Western Hemisphere and understanding this region, especially in contrast to Europe and other regions that the U.S. at least has paid more attention to in the past.
100%.
I think a big part of it is also policy. I think the Trumpian figure is one thing, but people in a lot of these Latin American countries, I know Bolivia for one, are finally, I think, starting to wake up to, hey, these policies didn't work for us. And now we're hearing, this man in the United States that just got elected president talk about, prosperity and freedom and liberty and personal responsibility. That resonates with them, I think, a lot. And I think that's why we're seeing so many countries wake up and kind of want a different path for themselves. It's this like big regional awakening. And I think that was even surprising with what we saw at CELAC, the Comunidad of Latin American and Caribbean states. They tried to release basically as a unified continent, they tried to release a statement against what President Trump had done in Venezuela, and 9 of the countries said, we're not signing that, we're not releasing that, because they wanted to condemn the capture of Nicolás Maduro. And so there's a big fracture there. I think a big part of it has to do with Trump and the kind of figure that he is. I think a big part is people waking up to the policies that actually work for their people.
And one of the central policies is immigration and deportations.
Yep.
Which is popular in Chile.
That's
popular
how Cast won.
It is how, yeah, exactly. And so I think this gets missed by a lot of the domestic media in the United States. Obviously we've had a problem with illegal immigration for a long time, thanks not only, but thanks in large part to the Venezuelan crisis. Every country in the region now has a crisis in illegal immigration. And I'd say the Chileans at the front of the line, right? But not just them. And so all this makes American-type conservatism, Trumpian-type conservatism, very popular.
And for the illegal immigration that they're experiencing, are we talking about whenever people are trying to get to the United States and the people that are going through their countries, or also people who try to reside and stay within their own countries?
It's both,
Okay.
But the extent to which the latter happens is I think underrecognized and underreported. When I was in Lima with a colleague back in April, there was a lot of talk about that. How many Venezuelans are now in Peru? You and I have had conversations with Chileans in which it was effectively the same. It was people coming across the Atacama from
Bolivians,
Bolivia.
A lot of Bolivians trying to escape the bad policies there.
Mm-hmm.
So we see reflected what we see at our border with Mexico. We can see that in South America definitely happening. And one of the reasons that some of these people are winning their elections, including Jose Antonio Cast, is basically repeating the same things that President Trump himself said. He's promised that he's going to build a wall, basically, to keep a lot of the Bolivian immigrants that are fleeing and coming to Chile, to keep them out, because they're very unstable because of it. And so, yeah, a lot of similarities with the U.S.
Well, speaking, I guess, about the fracturing in the region where you have, I guess, two different types of policy being proposed. Another interesting, I don't know if fracture is the right word here, but this is from Bloomberg, that Mexico shelves planned shipment of oil to Cuba amid U.S. tensions. So Mexico in the past has been very friendly to Cuba, maybe backing off a little bit. Josh, is that what we're seeing here?
We are seeing it. And, it's interesting. We had a colleague. I wonder if were you in this meeting? Anyway, there was a meeting with a certain Mexican government official, we won't say who, in which the issue of Mexico's support for the Cuban dictatorship came up. And we have to be clear that the reason the Mexican regime supports the Cuban dictatorship is because they like communist autocracy. Like, it is a positive affinity. Like, this is.
Josh, are you saying the country that invited the Russians and Chinese to march in their parade has an affinity for these
100%.
dictatorships?
Yeah, what a surprise! What a surprise! But they see Cuba as the anti-imperialist, anti-North American statelet, and so they're happy to send Mexican oil and Mexican money and Mexican taxpayer dollars. Too bad if you're Mexican. Over to the Havana regime. And after, when there was this meeting, sorry, I'm being purposely vague for the purpose of the show, but in this meeting in Mexico City, when this subject was raised, what the Mexican official said back to our colleague was that this is a relationship that's persisted for 60 years. It's
referring
not
to their relationship with Cuba?
With the Cubans, yeah. Stop asking about it, because it's never going to change. Like, this is just a permanent feature. And that permanent feature of Mexican policy lasted 90 days. And it lasted until the point that U.S. Army Chinooks flew over Caracas and grabbed Nicolás Maduro. And suddenly, Mexico was the only meaningful supplier of oil to Cuba. And suddenly, it became possible for the Mexicans to say, you know what? We're not going to really fully subsidize this regime anymore. So full credit to American statecraft here and to the Trump administration for compelling the Mexicans to do what Mexican officialdom at a very high level swore would never happen, which is back off their support for one of the worst regimes of the past century, certainly the worst regime in the Western Hemisphere in the past century, which is the Cuban Communist regime. And I am very, very optimistic that regime will be put into its worst straits yet in the year to come. And I certainly hope that there's a bright future for the people of Cuba as a result. But to get there, we had to make the Mexicans stop supporting tyranny.
U.S. pressure works.
It does.
That's what we were saying She has yet to confirm, like she basically didn't deny that she stopped that oil shipment.
Scheinbaum.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But she made sure to say that the U.S. had nothing to do with it. She said it was a sovereign decision. We chose to do that. Like she keeps wanting to put up that front.
Well, that's the question I was actually going to ask next. It sounds like every time that the Mexican government agrees to work with the United States, they're going to bring up this point of, well, we're such a good partner to you guys. See all that we're doing and look at what we've willingly chose to do, and we're just doing this. Do you think that that's going to be what we're going to hear next, and that they're like continue to, I guess, push that we've continued to be a good partner to you guys?
There's a certain class of listener that will understand this reference. I don't think it includes either of you, but for those of you out there,
I feel left out, don't you, Melissa?
No, you probably shouldn't actually. But for those of you out there who misspent your teenage years, Mexican friendship and cooperation with the United States on matters of security and national interest is like Smeagol's collaboration with Frodo and Mordor. It's
I
coerced.
feel offended. You don't think I would know Lord of the Rings reference,
Okay,
Josh?
all right. I didn't know. I didn't want to assume things.
You were
but,
right.
Oh, you said
yeah.
it's like Smeagol's relationship with
Not
Not me.
So we need to have Lord of the Rings viewing party after this. Next time you come to Austin instead, I guess. So how has Cuba reacted to this?
I mean, Cuba has officially denounced the imperialism of the United States. They've announced that they reject it. But what can they do? Honestly, at this point, there's nothing they can do. There's no alternative source. The Chinese aren't coming to help them. There's no oil-producing nation that's coming to help them. The Russians aren't coming to help them. The Chinese do operate a signals intelligence collection facility on the island, but that's really it. So if there's no support from Venezuela, from the Mexicans, they are in very, very, very bad shape, and we should exploit that.
And actually, this is something I'm just curious about. So why wouldn't they have be able to get access to oil from Russia or help from China? What's up that to begin with?
They have no money. I mean, honestly, they have no foreign
That's fair.
exchange. Yeah.
Wow. So I know we don't have a crystal ball, but either Melissa or Josh, you have any ideas of what we might see next for Cuba if they don't have an oil supplier anymore?
You first.
I'm not sure I can speculate on that.
I'm happy to speculate on it.
Well, please do.
It is my fond hope that great instability descends upon the Cuban state, and that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has lived and yearned for this moment, along with many other South Floridians, is able to swing a variety of plans into motion to bring freedom to Cuba.
I'm waiting for another meme to come out now with the one where Marco Rubio is sitting down and it's just like him in the Cuban outfit of some sort. Every time that he's called upon to take a new leadership position.
It seems to be a historical mission for the United States that about once every 120 years or so we bring freedom to Cuba. So we're overdue.
I thought you were going to say every once a day we give Marco Rubio a new job to do in the United States.
That too. Yeah.
Both of those. Hopefully this is the year.
So let's broaden this out a little bit. Let's talk about how all of this relates to national security. At the top of the show, we were talking a little bit about how we've refocused that focus on national security to the United States. And Melissa, you had an article published with the Daily Signal, and I thought you had a lot of really strong points. So you were just talking about how this is the first time in living memory the Western Hemisphere is a top priority. And you'd said that the United States has long viewed the Western Hemisphere like a fire extinguisher. Important in theory, hopefully unnecessary, out of mind until something's on fire. So is it on fire now? Is that why the attention's come back this way?
I think the attention has come back in large part because President Trump has made it happen. I think that he's realized that not only is the U.S. kind of the center of gravity for the entire hemisphere, but there are a lot of issues, like I said at the beginning of the show, that happen in South America, in Latin America, in our hemisphere that end up affecting the United States. And so by turning our focus once again on that region, we can stop a lot of problems before they hit us. And so we saw it with, the national security strategy. We've seen it with a lot of the policies that President Trump is putting out. We've seen it with even the people that he has appointed to surround him, to be in his cabinet, people like Secretary Rubio that are giving him good advice on what to do with this region. I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing this shift in foreign policy.
But that foreign policy shift is not only focused on South America, as we also heard at the beginning of the show. Greenland is becoming more and more a part of that discussion, and I guess the Arctic in general. So Josh, what insight do you have into that?
Yeah, Melissa's mentioned a couple times the national security strategy, which is a key document to read to understand what the administration is doing. And subsequent to it, just in the past week, as we're recording, the national defense strategy was released, which is obviously a subset of the broader NSS. The NDS is very interesting because it talks about key terrain in the Western Hemisphere that the United States has to have access to, not necessarily control, but definitely have access to. And it's the Panama Canal, it's the Caribbean Basin, and one of the things they mention is Greenland and the Arctic. And so it's important when we have this hemispheric perspective to understand that there's obviously multiple avenues of approach to the hemisphere. With the recession of Arctic sea ice, the Northwest Passage is increasingly open. And so what you're starting to see, it's still seasonal. Maybe it won't be at some point. What you're trying to see is direct sea routes that essentially go over the poles from East Asia to Europe or from East Asia to the East Coast of the United States. And this fundamentally changes a lot of the strategic geography that we have to be concerned about. And so, what the NDS envisages, and I think what the Trump administration understands very clearly, is that as a consequence of this new access that we have to the high north, we have an obligation to adjust our strategy and our allocations of resources accordingly, and that's playing out, obviously with respect to Greenland, because Greenland, sits astride these sea lanes that I'm talking about. Greenland also has great utility for missile defense, and it's also going to play out in northern Alaska. It's going to play out in the Canadian Arctic, and so you are going to see. In the years to come, and I don't mean many years to come, but in the near years to come, a lot more activity and interest in what's going on in the far north, in places that previously were not really objects of attention. It's inevitable that somebody's going to want to know who controls Svalbard. Do you know what Svalbard is?
No.
Nobody else does either, but it is essentially a Norwegian-administered island that everybody has free access to. I'm badly oversimplifying this.
Where is it located?
It's in the high north. It's in the Arctic. And so if you go essentially due east from Greenland, several thousand miles, you're going to eventually hit Svalbard. And so there's a lot of territories like that are minimally inhabited or uninhabited, that as they become accessible, you're gonna see not only transit routes, you're gonna see mineral wealth that becomes available. You're gonna see military positions at the strategic level that were previously inaccessible. And so the question is, how does the United States position itself in a way that maintains the security of the continent as a whole, of North America and the Western Hemisphere, while all this opening up is happening? And that's going to drive a lot of activity in the years to come.
Well, I like putting a full circle in our conversations. So, Josh, you're great at making through lines. How do we get from Greenland to Mexico? What is the connection here in relation to the United States and our strategy on foreign policy?
Well, again, I think to end where we begin, everything takes place in a broader context. The United States cares about Mexico, obviously, because it's an extremely populous neighbor with a lot of instability that exports a lot of problems to the United States. A lot of opportunities, too, attendant in Mexico. So we have to look at both sides. But what we really need to do from a continental perspective, I don't even mean a hemispheric perspective, but sitting in North America, what we need to really understand is that North America has particular approaches and ways to access it. And the United States, as the hegemon, there's no other way to put it, on the North American continent, has to be able to mount a strategic defense of these approaches, because fundamentally, the purpose of government in the American concept is to secure our liberties, and one of the ways in which liberties must be secured is by defense against the outside world. And to do that, and this is one of the great things about the Trump administration, to do that, we have to think very critically about how defense works, where we go to do it. And Greenland, Mexico, the Caribbean Basin, the Pacific approaches, and so on, these are the answers to questions that are now being asked.
That's awesome. Melissa, is there anything else from your research coming up that you want people to look forward to?
Actually, as you were saying that, Josh, I was thinking about one more thing that I neglected to add at the very beginning of the show. But I think another reason that the U.S. has shifted focus to the Western Hemisphere, and another reason why we're seeing what's happening in Greenland, why we're seeing kind of the United States taking this leading role in the rest of the hemisphere, is in protection of it. We've had a lot of nations, extra hemispheric powers, if you will, that are not friendly to the United States, that have been establishing a big presence in our hemisphere so that they can use it as a staging ground against the United States. And so I think that is another thing to focus on. That is something that we will be working on. We're working on research about basically Chinese, Russian, and Iranian influence in the Western Hemisphere. So that's something to look out for. I think that will be very interesting to see. I'm definitely excited to dive into it.
And then Josh, from both with the perspective of the Texas Public Policy Foundation and America First Policy Institute, what are you looking forward to this year in terms of the research and the stuff that we're going to be looking into?
There's a ton of research that's going to be coming out of both AFPI and TPPF. On the TPPF side, you're going to see not too many spoilers, but you're going to see really groundbreaking research from a lot of our colleagues here: Celine Rodriguez, Eamon Blair, Antonio Sosa, who are going to really push the bounds of policy understanding and knowledge on the nature of the Mexican state, on U.S. approaches to Mexico, on new ways to secure the border, figuring out how expansive state powers under the U.S. Constitution can be to do that. And so I'm really excited about that. And on the AFPI side, Melissa and I just spent a day talking about this. We're going to be putting out research on the Arctic. We're going to be putting out research on South American strategy. We're going to have some real foundational papers on what the U.S. strategic approach to the hemisphere should be, because believe it or not, there really is nothing doctrinal out there that talks about that. Yeah. I'll give you a spoiler. One of the things that we're going to talk about is the need for the United States to have an offshore approach with regard to South America, very consonant with what the British approach to the continent of Europe used to be. All this stuff is things that we are going to think through, and as policy institutions, both at TPPF and AFPI, we have an obligation to be the font of those ideas and then to move them into policy, and we're very excited to get the chance to do that.
I am excited for this year and for everything that's going to come out. Do you have any last words of inspiration for our listeners from both the Hard Country and the Western Front? I'm
just grateful to work with both of you, Ariana, on the Hard Country, and Melissa for several years now. First at the Hard Country and now at AFPI. Yeah. But welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's been great to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
I hope you were able to defrost a little bit from the DC weather.
It's been a nice break. Not ready to go back yet.
Well, I look forward to the next time that you're in Austin or the next time we get to visit DC. So thank you guys both for taking the time to sit down. This has been both an episode of the Hard Country and the Western Front. We will see you next time.